Hi, welcome to Morning Talk Show. Today is a conversation with Mark Vernon. I've had Mark on the show before, and as we talk about in this conversation, he has been probably of all the guests, he has influenced me the most through his writings and the way he thinks and the conversations we've had. He turned me on to Owen Barfield. He has recently written a book called Awake about William Blake, which we discuss and is a wonderful book. He wrote a book called The Secret History of Christianity, which really did change my way of thinking about Christianity in a good way and really put me on a good path, I would say. So I really enjoyed this conversation. It is one of those that, for me, I can't speak for Mark, deepened as it went along and became kind of more personal and felt as it went along, but never got completely away from the topic. So I really thought it was great, and the spirit of conversation in it was very uplifting in a way that increased from the beginning to the end of the conversation. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Like and subscribe and hit the bell and all those silly things if you're on YouTube. And thank you for watching. Here's Mark Vernon. All right. Mark Vernon. Welcome again to Morning Talk Show.
Good to join you again. I look forward to what we might talk about this time.
Yeah. I should say that you're far more than a guest to me. You're somebody who kind of lives in my mind, someone who lives rent free in my mind because of some of the ways that your writing has impacted me, specifically A Secret History of Christianity and the introduction to Owen Barfield that came through that, and just this sort of spiraling spiritual enrichment that's kind of come from all of that. So thank you very much for your work.
Yeah, well, look, it's my sort of attempt at development and understanding, and as much a practice as an inquiry and so on. So it's wonderful when that which is affecting you speaks to other people as well. So there's very much a sort of sense of shared path here, I think.
Totally. And it's evident too, right? Like your writing has that transparency to it, where I can see through you to the things that you are that you're sensing, and the ways that things are impacting you. So it's really cool. It's really great, and it's been very impactful to me. So how has your day been so far?
I've had the day. I work as a psychotherapist as well as writing, and so I work with people 3 days a week in that way, and then do the writing and so on other days. But this comes at the end of a day actually where I've been with people. Okay. So, and the mix is good. It keeps you sort of working at different levels, if you like.
Right.
And obviously, if you have people walking through the door, they want some sort of response that's meaningful to them, as well as the larger trajectory of things which you can follow in books. So the combination works well.
Good. Good. Yeah, a change is as good as a rest is what they say. So if you can switch to from one activity to a different kind of activity, that's great. I ostensibly wanted to talk to you about your new book, Awake, about William Blake. But it's interesting. I think one of the fascinating things, and I hope that people who watch this or listen to this will look into more of your work, because you kind of have a constellation of thinkers that you engage with very, very deeply you've got Barfield and Milton and Blake, um, and you seem to really go so deep into their way of thinking, and the types of thoughts that they have, that you can, yeah, it seems very lived in and very indwelled. What made you select Blake for this part of your life and this part of your career?
It's partly because I live in South London, and it's the mystical side of Christianity that draws me, and mysticism more generally as well. And by that, I mean how you can have a felt sense of God in life, and in life in all its fullness, in all the different ways that you encounter it, both darkness and light. And so Blake is my local mystic, and moreover, he writes in English, so you can have a direct encounter with him that way if English is your native tongue. And also, though, over the last 5 or 6 years, he's been a figure that I've become increasingly aware of, that many people know a little bit about Blake. They'll have heard the phrase "to see a world in a grain of sand and a heaven in a wildflower," and others. But then there's this question of, what more is he saying? How is he saying it? And I had the chance to be involved in a couple of reading groups where we read particularly two of Blake's longer poems, sort of very slowly over a number of months. And it felt to me that there was something in Blake that wasn't really being well expressed, although I say it myself, in other books by Blake. And particularly this is that he's a very astute thinker, that he is a Christian mystic, that he lived with non-human others of a spiritual nature, angels and so on, wanting to take that seriously.
Yeah.
So a number of things came together that the more journalistic side of me thought, there's an angle here, there's a way in, that might produce a book that hasn't been written before about Blake, at least to our particular moment. And yeah, so the combination of things, my own personal feel of being pulled towards Blake and wanting to know more, but also the more practical question of, when you write a book, who's going to publish this, and why would they want to publish it, and who want to read it, and why would they want to read it? I suppose the other element that really came alive to me is that Blake, I think, has a spiritual analysis of his times, 200 years ago, the Georgian period, but which was seeding what have become our times. So he's very relevant to us now, because in a way we live now the world in a full manifestation that he saw just beginning to be born in his times. And I do feel that whatever else you make of what's going on in our times, to understand the undercurrents is always useful. Otherwise, you just get caught up trying to deal with symptoms the whole time. And so I think he has something to say to our times as well, very clearly.
Yeah, I mean, very much so. And I've read more than half of the book. I was able to get an advance copy. My plan is to listen. I'm hoping you're going to do the audiobook as you usually do with your own voice.
Yeah, actually, I'm not. I haven't. It is coming out in December 2025, but I haven't recorded it myself this time.
Okay.
Partly because there's a lot of poetry in the book. I wanted to weave Blake's writing in the prose,
Right.
my own work, and it's very hard. You need to be quite skilled to be able to hold those two or more voices, because actually,
Right.
Blake's poetry is in multiple voices too. So I was very glad when the publisher said, we'll get someone to do this. So it won't be my voice this time, but I think that will be for the good.
All right. Yeah. Okay. Fine. I'll accept it. I'll still listen to the audiobook because I really take things in well that way. And I guess you sounds like maybe there'll be like sort of a thespian type person doing it, which will be nice to hear the poetry in that voice. Just as an aside, one of the ways you live rent free in my head is I think about Owen Barfield all the time, and I made an Owen Barfield audiobook of of Saving the Appearances, because I wanted to read it and I have a real difficulty reading silently in my head. It's like a whole thing. Um, and so, but whenever I think of his phases of participation, I hear withdrawal. I hear your voice saying withdrawal of participation. I don't hear withdrawal like I would say it. I hear your voice. But at any rate, yeah. Sorry, I got us off topic there. But it
Uh-huh.
was one of the things that I took away from the book, and you can correct me if I've misrepresent it, is that Blake and some of the like the romantic poets and such were responding to what you're saying, has flowered into the modern age when it was still like in the excited fad kind of phase where people were kind of still excited about the promise of modernity and and technology and things, and Blake and other writers and thinkers and romantics like kind of responded to it in that nascent period where the spirit of it could be seen very obviously, instead of it becoming just absolutely the water that we swim in
Mm,
now.
mhm,
And it,
mm.
it seems very prescient, but like, well, yeah, it definitely is very prescient, but like it's almost hard to understand. I don't know. Like it's almost hard. I think Blake is a kind of a controversial thinker, but you have to really indwell his thinking and recognize how revolutionary it was at the time to get that. Does all this make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think we live in divided times, and it's the division is at all levels, if you like, a sort of metaphysical division. So the official science is purely materialistic, and yet all science is done through consciousness, which materialism can't give any account for. And then, of course, there's political division, and even in ourselves, we talk about the body, and then we talk about the soul, and so it's very interesting to think what are the deep reasons for that bifurcated vision. And Blake lives at this period where, particularly, the achievements of Isaac Newton were still stunning people. We've taken for granted now that the force that causes the moon to go around the earth is the same that causes an apple to drop from a tree,
Right.
the law of gravity. But that was a remarkable imaginative linking that was then made tractable in mathematics. And it led to this mania, as you're saying, for finding laws and patterns and connections, symmetries across all domains of human knowledge, including the mind, including morality, including politics and governance, education, learning.
Mm.
And I think that what that then also prompted, almost at exactly the same time, was the romantic response to the Enlightenment. And Blake is sometimes associated with the early Romantics. There's some reason for that. And this was stressing not the lawful and the ordered and the designed, if you like, but the organic and the connected and the felt. So you get these two big responses to life that still shape our times very dramatically. We obviously, on one hand, live in a very lawful society in the sense that, say, the state, through bureaucracy and particularly now through technology, shapes and patterns our lives in ways that would have been shocking even, to people 2 or 3 generations ago. But at the same time, we live in this hugely imaginative, felt kind of world. I mean, therapy is a product of that as well. And there's barely a surface in our homes and on our streets, in our hands, of course, in gizmos, that isn't shaped by the imagination, hasn't got some sort of image on it that's trying to say something to us. But in this split, strangely enough, and this would be a Barfieldian point, has also emerged a great crisis of meaning. What is the meaning of all this?
Yeah.
Why is life like this? And so in Blake's era, words like nihilism, started to be used for the first time as well. And I think Blake understood what's happening there, because what the split does is it actually abstracts us from reality itself, both in terms of the abstractions of science and bureaucracy and the artificial worlds that we live in now, but also an unmoored imagination that really just seeks a kind of intensified feeling, as if that's a proxy for meaning, when of course it's not, and it actually just leads to excesses, and excesses that we know very well now: reactionary nationalism, fundamentalist religion, even sort of a therapeutic excess that equates profundity of feeling and experience with the truth of yourself. And so I think that all around us now we see the results of a kind of uncoupling from what Blake would call the minute particulars, which is why he sees a world in a grain of sand, not in some abstract articulation of the world, and a heaven in a wild flower. And so I think that his analysis through these poetic descriptions and encounters and arguments and imagery and so on has this wonderful alchemy that actually takes you back to reality itself. Because the thing about poetry and imagery is that it always comes with imagination, which is the invitation to reach out yourself and be met by the imagination that's shaping all these things around you. And so, Blake is not just a significant poet, he is a significant visionary and mystic, because his poetry is not just revolutionary as poetry, but it also revolutionizes your perception even as you're reading it. As long as you don't force him through the sieve of your already received worldview, which is what happens when people say, oh, he didn't really see angels, he just had hyperphantasia or aphantasia or some sort of diagnosis. Or no, he's just a romantic in the sense he lives in a sort of dream world. He hasn't got anything concrete to say to the Enlightenment rationality of his times and ours. If you let him speak fully, follow the golden string, as he puts it, then I think he can become this hugely important figure now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what I see in your work, that it probably doesn't get seen to the right degree, is that you're not it doesn't feel like you're a Blake apologist. It feels like you're actually trying to cultivate a sense of openness to what he was saying, and to cultivate a sense of presence to what he was saying, and everything you're saying is almost encouraging people to resist the modern. I almost think of like off ramps. Like you're on the path of someone's mind. You're connecting with an author, and something happens. Like, he possibly considered bringing in a mistress, and then in addition to his wife, and then the modern mind wants to go on an off ramp, to a moralistic interpretation of what's going on, and to make blanket assumptions about what kind of person he could have been. And you're just like, no, stay with it, stay present to it, and look at the whole, or try to feel the whole, which is why it can be such a long process to engage these thinkers that are so real to you and so clearly real to you. Like Barfield is someone who I am still thinking about. Like, having read the book, it's like I could describe what I think it was saying, and there's so much more that you could take away, and the modern mind wants to boil it all down, But I think we are in that phase that Barfield described as the withdrawal of participation now, which if you sort of couple it with maybe even Jesus Christ's statement about I come not to bring peace but a sword, to separate. The Bible basically promises separation, and Barfield kind of describes. Barfield and Blake actually describe this phase of withdrawal of participation, which was obviously not Blake's term, as kind of an opportunity, like as being pregnant with opportunity, and promise, as well, which kind of makes it oddly hopeful. Like I think Blake feels more hopeful to me than Barfield, but both of them just kind of accepted um, this modern age that was coming as a reality and as something to be looked at with curiosity and wonder. And that's something that your book pointed out in Blake that was a comfort to me, not being as familiar with Blake as some other people, is that he wasn't giving in to that romantic uh, drive to limit, to boil down, to call for a return. And I think arguably, you could make an argument that a lot of those romantic poets and authors weren't exactly arguing for a return, but again, off ramps, right? We read these things and we think, well, we just have to return. That's the idea. We have to return to an older way of thinking, which Barfield, if you read Saving the Appearances, you kind of can't believe anymore that we can return to a previous era of in the evolution of consciousness. You can't evolve backwards, and I kind of love that in a way. Like the flaming, one of the images that's in my head is that the flaming sword that kept Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden is right at our backs. You know what I mean? It's not back there, and we can go find Eden, and if we can just figure out how to get through that, past that flaming sword, we'll be back in the Garden of Eden. It's like, no, it moves with us through history, and it's not even a bad thing. It's just a thing. Is this kind of, I've now ranted for too long, but are these thoughts resonating?
No, for sure. And I love that reference to the flaming sword. Because I think one of the divisions in modern Christianity is between those who feel that what Christianity is about is a kind of restoration of a lost order that was delivered in Eden and somehow wrecked by humanity.
By women,
And
even,
those,
they'll say, they'll
yeah,
literally
yeah,
pin it on a gender, which is wild. But anyway, keep going.
yeah, yeah. Or those who feel no, that Christianity detects a kingdom that's coming, and that if we align our lives to that spirit and give ourselves to it, we can become part of that emergence as well. So it's a future orientated Christianity. But, both people who get nostalgic about the past and long for a different tomorrow always run the risk of hating the present. The present is where the problem is. Yeah. And both Barfield and Blake, actually, I think, say no. There's deep trouble in the present, but that trouble is also part and parcel of the divine rebirthing of a new kingdom, a new creation. And so hence, peace and sword, they go together. Blake would call them contraries. And Barfield, who's very influenced by Coleridge, who was a near contemporary of Blake, would call them polarities. Yeah. And the point about polarities, like the poles on a magnet, is that they create a field, and it's it's in the field that the energy is. And we're living in that field now. And so resisting the temptation to divide, but instead realizing that there's a difference between division and distinction, as Coleridge would put it, and entering into that distinction and awaiting for a new third to emerge. That would be much more the Barfieldian and the Blakean way. Yeah, so that's also, I think, why they're so intriguing. I mean, and Blake captures it so well in many of his phrases, which you feel the truth of and wonder what the living of it might be. So he who binds to himself the joy does the winged life destroy, Blake says. He who kisses the joy as it flies lives in eternity's sunrise.
Yeah.
So the binding to yourself is like, I want that bit, I don't want that bit, and you just
Right.
divide life. But
Yeah.
if you can lean into the movement of life itself, the becoming of life, kissing the joy as it flies, which is also a kind of emptying movement, because you have to let go of that which you would want to cling on to, but of course you're emptying into that which is the source of everything anyway. So it's actually a filling at the same time as an emptying, and hence kissing the joy as it flies lives, moves into eternity's sunrise.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so this is why I think, Blake and Barfield are deeply Christian. I mean, they have a porous kind of Christianity. They see similar motifs in other traditions,
Yeah.
but they are, go back to what you were saying, at the start there. They are historicists. They do believe that there are patterns you can discern in history for all the chaos and randomness of history too, and that's really important for understanding our times,
Hmm.
for seeing that there isn't just the kind of empty nihilism, meaninglessness around us.
Yeah.
That how we're living now has significance. How we're responding to now has significance,
Yeah.
um, and
Yeah.
it's yeah. So I'm sure this is absolutely right, and again, another part of why they're so important.
Yeah. And I love the polarities thing. Sorry, that polarities was Barfield. What was the term that like distinctions?
Contraries,
Oh,
contraries. Yeah,
contraries. Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And I think contraries feels a little bit more loaded in a modern context, but the polarities thing really has a certain familiar ring of truth to it. And because we live in a world of opposites now, it feels like, where we
Mm.
want to separate things out and abstract them to the point that they're opposites, you know what I mean? Or things can be owned and contained within us, and segregated. And it feels like that the polarities thing is wonderful. The magnetic polarities, um, I love that, and I even apply it in my mind to things like this conversation, where there can be an energy between two people, um, and those people are never opposites, but they are two different perspectives. And so you can think of
Mm.
of life as having, whenever there's a duality, there's that energy, and it feels like tension. To especially to the modern mind, it could feel like tension, and you could want to relieve the tension by going to one side or the other. But I do love that Blake resists that, and I think something that kind of is a very difficult tension for me and for lots of people, I assume, maybe everybody, is that darkness, light, shadow, and light tension of the human experience. Like, and I guess, like, honestly, I think the erotic side is maybe even one of the clearest places to see that, because uh, it feels like leaning into a moralistic, prohibitive way of thinking, which lists basically sin as a list of very specific activities and righteousness as a list of very specific activities, drives the value of that dark side um, up, but not even in a way that is like, again, the off ramp for this, the modern off ramp for this is, of course, sin will always have a lure and a draw, right? But there's something else, and um, I think you've felt it, and I know I've felt it, where there's something for you there that you can't get in the restrictive, moralistic, constrained part of human life, and yet it only has that glow because of that polarity. You know what I mean? You can't, just as you can't run to hyper moralism, and which I think is probably much more where we're at historically than people want to admit. We're not a hedonistic society in the way that people think. We could almost stand to be more hedonistic in some ways, right? So I guess I'll give you a chance to respond to that. It just feels like we don't know how to navigate that. And I don't know how to navigate that. I've got young children and I need to teach them a sexual ethic, right? Of some kind. And I need to model one for them. And so, yeah, I guess it's not even clear enough to phrase into a question, but I'm hoping this can be something that you can run with.
Yeah, yeah. Well, actually, I mean, maybe one way of responding is that the way that we're inclined to think about, say, sexual ethics, but I think it applies to all ethics, is to treat it in a kind of atomistic way, to try and electrolyze life, split it down into its basic parts. So normally when people are talking about sexual ethics, what they really mean is what you should do and what you shouldn't do, and the contexts in which you should and shouldn't do things. And that is a mode of thinking about the good life that emerges in Blake's time. Even in one decade, in the 1780s, two forms of ethical theory emerge based on the Newtonian impulse to find laws or a kind of calculation that tells you how to live, much as a calculation and laws tell you how the moon orbits the Earth. And so this is utilitarianism in England, the idea that there's a philosophic calculus, as Bentham called it, that enables you to work out what's good because it delivers the greatest happiness to the greatest number. And then in Prussia, there's Kant's deontology, which is the attempt to derive universal laws that anyone who was rational and sane would agree to. So an example is do not lie. Because if I lie and then you lie, before we know what, everything descends into a kind of chaos. So similarly, sexual ethics ceases to be about what kind of person you're becoming or how you're navigating the love and the hate that flows through you, or how sexuality and the erotic is a reaching towards that which is beautiful and is awakened in different phases and patterns of life. Undergoes initiations, which is how someone like Plato wrote about it, and instead becomes this rather flat question of you reach a certain age, what should you do and what shouldn't you do? Or are certain acts allowed and other acts really aren't allowed? And so what that turns the erotic, which is the desire to be connected and to have communion, into a kind of abstract, objectified set of behaviors that somehow you're supposed to. It's the very act of thinking about sexual ethics in this way is dehumanizing. And surprise, surprise, the church and other parts of society are in a complete mess about it. The very impulse that's in the heart of the erotic desire is removed before you've even started talking about it, which is the desire for beautiful, to be joined, to have union, to be able to step out of yourself, but to join with another, and of course with God as well. So I mean, Blake writes about this. He writes a poem called Visions of the Daughters of Albion, which is about the sexual awakening of his heroine in that poem, called Uthun. And it's a complicated journey she goes on. This is not easy. But what Blake never loses sight of is that the erotic in her, that's awoken in her, is a desire for connection. And while she makes mistakes and terrible things are done to her, actually, by the end of the poem, she's had a kind of awakening, which is that impulse to give and to receive from life is shared by the whole of life. And so the kind of summary phrase by the end is, all things are holy. And this is a phrase that Blake repeats elsewhere as well. And seeing that all things are holy is to have developed this erotic impulse in you to such an extent that it changes your perception of all things. Now, that's got nothing to do with what you should and shouldn't do. It's more like, how are you seeing what's going on? what person are you becoming in the life that you're leading? How are you adapting and responding to the waves of imagination and fancifulness and love and hate and so on? It's a bit like what we're saying with Christianity. The present moment is the moment in which the kingdom's being born. It's not back there. It's not about to come at some point in the future. It is being born now. And similarly with the erotic, the goal of all erotic desire is either being born or it's being thwarted. And I think there's something in that about how to think about the erotic. But of course, this would terrify any kind of religious leader because they wouldn't be able to stand in a pulpit and say, do this, don't do that. They'd have to dwell themselves in their desire. There's a judgment involved, but it's the judgment that seeks understanding, not the judgment that seeks to tidy things up. So it's a very radical shift.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, and feel free to just not answer this, but as a gay man in originally in Anglican priesthood, was this a part of what awakened you to sort of greater meanings in life outside? Because you had what seemed to be a prohibited desire. But you could sense somehow, and I don't want to speak for you, that there was a holiness to it, or something like that. Is that part of your story?
Yeah, for sure. It's the story of belonging to a church, and when you get ordained, you become an ambassador for that institution by wearing a dog collar. In the case of the Church of England, and that was intolerable because a very intimate and key part of my life, which is to do with love, was talked about in every way apart from as if it was about love. And I couldn't, deal with that. So I left. But it's also then what led me to be so interested in the mystics, because mystics are one of the few people that write about the Christian revelation and understand that the erotic and love is part of that. So Dante, in the case of his youthful infatuation with Beatrice, that is the seed that leads him to the divine vision. And similarly with Blake, I think Blake is very clearly, and as a young man, he was very sort of supercharged by love and infatuation and falling for women and so on. And then he meets Catherine, and they seem to have been a match made in heaven because his sort of fieriness met her fieriness, and they could make a commitment to work it out together. But it's not just about a relationship between two human beings. It's about how the divine emerges in that context. And so, I couldn't stand to stay in the church, but within Christianity more broadly, I think there are the resources to grappling and engage with these things. They're not welcome in the church because the church is an institution that lives by the law, not by the spirit, for the most part, in my sense, anyway, my experience.
And the erotic, I do think that you're striking on something important there with sort of the noticing the presence of the erotic in all of life, quite aside from, interpersonal relationships, would be a great way to hopefully develop a sexual ethic. I think it's one of those things that's got a certain amount of fear in it, even for me, who, my propositional beliefs would be totally, in favor of seeing the erotic and using that energy and all of that. But then, we have to think of how to turn these things into rules and that kind of thing. And it just doesn't lend itself to that. I mean, the human being doesn't lend itself to finite laws. And it's a fascinating way to look at it. What's the name of the female Christian mystic you reference in the book who was pierced by God?
Teresa of Avila.
That's right, Teresa of Avila.
Great love to quote.
And that kind of thing is, I think, so interesting, and it's really an energy that is so missing from Christianity, and so evident in Blake, and it's something we all experience, but you can't. But it's easy to imagine that when you limit the erotic and when you abstract it out into this one, not only this one part of life, but really a very private and secretive in the modern world part of life, then yeah, conceivably we would miss those times where that erotic energy, completely apart from sexuality, was present in other things, right? So that all of life's passions would be kind of dampened down, I guess.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So, I mean, figure again, Teresa of Avila is another astonishing figure, because she too lived this life, where she was porous to the divine, and hence, a lot of her discussion and description of that carries this erotic charge. And yet she was also a great intellect. And actually, in order to justify herself to the Inquisition, who wanted to know quite what was going on, she wrote her life, and then she writes other things as well, like the Interior Castle.
Yeah.
And so, she'd be another figure who provides this extraordinarily rich resource that's there right in the middle of the Christian tradition. And she's not even a doctor of the church, and yet, I mean, maybe this has always got to be something that is done, as it were, personally, or aside from an official institution.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. I don't think it's true in all religious traditions, actually. But it's certainly, I mean, another element, we probably talked about this before, is that for some reason, early in the Christian mentality, the freedom that came with Christ was contrasted with Roman freedom, which often meant the freedom to do what you wanted with other people's bodies if you were a free man. And so that kind of contrast, unfortunately, wasn't just the useful one for figures like Paul to make, when they were asking the question, what is this new freedom found in Christ? But it was literalized again, and became kind of set for all time. Yeah.
And in the book, you describe Georgian England as having a kind of an unusually open stance towards certain things, and the Moravians being kind of having some somewhat sexual rights, in what they did, which is something that is another thing I notice about your thinking and Barfield and Blake, is that there's this sense of, rather than accept or reject, opposites, the ways that people thought of and saw things in antiquity, there is, it's more like, what would we have lost when we changed the way that we see this? What might we find, and not even, you don't have to frame it in the negative. What might we find if we looked at things this way again? And like, have you read much Ivan Illich?
Yeah, no, I have. Yeah.
He's a really interesting thinker to me, and he was obsessed with the 12th century, I think it was, and the times when certain conceptions were being changed around. For example, the gaze was thought of in that time as being something that goes out from you and caresses and touches. Like, if I gaze at you through this screen, my gaze is going across your face, and like brushing your mustache or whatever, like that. And I've tried since reading that to think of it that way. When I look at my children, that there's something going out from me. I'm not simply an observer of their behavior or whatever, looking at them and taking, this childlike wonder that they have, and vampirically taking it into myself. I'm also pushing out a fatherly gaze onto them that caresses them and feels them. And that's just one example. And I think it's sort of, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to be one of the hallmarks of a visionary thinker, is that these frames of mind can be kind of moved between, and multiple experiences can be had intentionally, and you begin to develop a sense of how to sort or selecting the perspective or something, or the frame through which you will view a situation, or intentionally putting yourself in a certain frame, or recognizing when you're in a particular frame and leaning into it to see with curiosity, to see what comes of it. Is that something? Is there something there for you to talk about?
Yeah, no,
My
definitely. I
interview
think
style is so.
Illich is, he's a historicist too. So which in this context means not so much that there are patterns in history, but something deeper actually, which is that it's not just that human beings have different thoughts in different periods of time, but the very way in which people think changes. And by thinking is also meant the way that people perceive, the way that people know themselves and know others and know nature and know the divine. There's not a sort of progressive or regressive, as if it's just a kind of accumulation or loss. But the very way in which people experience life shifts. So, for example, Newton's that second law of motion, the very idea that there's laws that might govern nature, that's not just something that gradually over the millennia, human beings have been getting the laws right. No, about 2 centuries before Newton, Francis Bacon had to say, approaching nature through the lens of laws is the right way to approach nature. No one before would have thought of that. Nomos is a Greek word, law, but it meant much more like customs and patterns and relationships, not lex, as Francis Bacon has it from the Latin, which is the commandments that the Roman general would utter to the troops, kind of abstract necessities. Yeah. So this is the point that both Illich and Barfield and Blake are onto, and that I think we're wrestling with now. Is it where we've reached, in a certain way, the limits of what the modern mindset can help us with in terms of understanding life. And goodness me, it's brought lots of benefits. We're talking through technology. We value the individual in a way that never happened before. We've developed a new sense of freedom and so on. Yeah. But we've reached the end of this particular paradigm. And so people like Barfield, Blake, Illich say, as it were, dwell at the stress points of the paradigm, not in order to attack those who you feel are your enemies, but in order to feel into what might be emerging. And for Illich, the notion of friendship is absolutely fundamental to this. His ethic, in the sense of his virtues that he most values, friendship is right there amongst them, because the friendship circle is a group of people that's big enough to have diversity, so you can feel the field and so therefore sense what might be emerging, but isn't so big that it becomes abstract, so you're not really relating to actual people. So a kind of ethic of friendship, I should say really a virtue of friendship, because that word ethic to me just too much means laws and rules. But those qualities that you need to develop in order to have friendship, which is really about the emergence of what happening in between the friends. That's really what makes friendship. There's always a third thing being born in amongst the circle of friends, unlike lovers that just gaze into each other's eyes and seek for completion in that way.
I could hear almost your friend Rupert's Sheldrake's voice saying the laws of nature are really more like habits. I wonder actually. So I guess I'm realizing that my interview style, I'm not even sure if it is an interview style, is really like throw the things on my mind against the wall of your mind, and let you kind of put them together in a way that's interesting. But which is not.
Let me just reframe things. I think actually dialogues like this, and I wonder whether there's something about these, online dialogues. Another way of putting it is that you have to offer your best if it's going to be at all interesting to listen to. I have to kind of offer my best in order to respond. But hopefully that, which is a kind of offering, it is a kind of emptying, create something in the process. And so I think these free form dialogues are, I hope they're kind of the spirit of what Barfield will call final participation, a renewed sense of what it is to engage with life.
And thank you for reframing that, because I was giving in momentarily to a little bit of self-derision. That really is the spirit that I want to show, and I feel like if that spirit comes through, and none of the content of what we've said comes through, it will not be a wasted enterprise. But I guess the last idea, or one of the last ideas I wanted to kind of throw in, was something that keeps coming back to my mind, which is that basically when we think about all of these different ways, from the 12th century gaze to the to the Georgian sexual ethic, to all of these things, the specter of postmodernism starts to creep in, and I always wonder, like, I'll never quite be able to drop the postmodern intuition, and I feel that this was a missed opportunity for someone seeking the mind of Christ to take up that mantle even of postmodernism and maybe bring it into the modern era, because it obviously the failings and the oversimplifications of postmodernism are well known, and I'm kind of glad we're past that phase where every other video I see on YouTube is about how postmodernism is so bad. But at the same time, I feel like the postmodern intuition was getting at something very real, which is that as time goes on, we are all in, like, there's as many frames of reality as there are human beings walking around. And yet there's a great opportunity in that. Of course, you can go down the road of saying, well, it's just really a form of criticism. And I can read the works of Shakespeare from a feminist lens and determine that he was a chauvinist or whatever. I don't know. I don't even know if that's a thing that people say. At the same time, how will we ever see all of the patterns that become universal if we don't see them, in all of these, through all of these bubbles, and if we don't enter into all of these different worlds, and say and look for Christ in, that's how I frame it, in these places. Look for the Spirit, look for the pattern that is recognizable beyond, like, far beyond the sort of political viewpoint, and I mean, I love the contrast between awake and woke, which I don't know if that was in any way part of your thinking, because I know awake, being awake is, a Blakean concept to be explored. But at the same time, I cannot get on this anti-woke train, because if you bring your heart to it and you see it, then you see those intuitions that those things that glow for a woke person that will be just missed by people, especially if they're categorizing themselves as anti-woke. And I did not intend to go down the woke, anti-woke thing. I meant to talk about postmodernism. So I guess I'll get back to that and say, is there any way in which you see Blake as having resonance or harmony with postmodernism?
Yeah, I mean, I think that postmodernism, and indeed, this tangle about whether you're awake or awoke or whatever, is it's because it's all sort of reactionary. And actually, I think this does resonate across the modern period. But you mentioned Barfield's book, Saving the Appearances, and it's called that slightly strange title because Barfield argued that what distinguishes the modern mentality, or at least one way of distinguishing the modern mentality, there's numerous ways you can do it, they're all sort of connected, is when Galileo Galilei, it wasn't that he came up with heliocentrism rather than geocentrism. The sun at the center of all things had been known for millennia. It was talked about in the 3rd century BC at least. But what Barfield argued was that rather than heliocentrism and geocentrism being different ways, different perspectives that you could talk about the cosmos that ultimately lay beyond your conception, because that conception was held only in the mind of God. Galileo said, no, there's one human theory that is the right theory. one hypothesis can be shown to be correct. And so it's a theory about theories rather than a theory about the cosmos. And Galileo's theory about theories flattens, because it also says that the truth can be known in the human mind rather than the human mind being as many finite reflections of the infinite divine mind.
Yeah.
And funny enough, I've got a book here. It's a huge book that was sent for me for a review. If I sort of, you can see how large it is, I hope. And it's a very fascinating book because it's from the Dutch Golden Age. This great artist, Solarius, who presents in this book not just one map of the skies, but 4 different schemas, maps of the skies. So there's the Potomac universe, the geocentric. There's the Keplerian universe. There's a Galilean universe, but there's also actually a Christianized universe too, as Solarius himself saw it. And the point about this is that in the one book, originally, you could produce all those different cosmologies, and they were seen as many reflections on the one that exceeds all imagination. I don't know if you ever saw that book, but he would have said, no, there's one that's correct. And then, of course, because reality does exceed any hypothesis that a human being has, you get the reaction. But the reaction now, the postmodern reaction, is uncoupled from the sense that there is a unity that lies beyond our grasp over the horizon. But nonetheless, we can still relate to, because it's like a strange attractor of the good, the beautiful, and the true, that amidst the chaos of all the different perspectives is, drawing through the erotic desire all things to itself. So I think that's what's happened. The postmodern is strangely like the pre-modern in a way, except for this one crucial difference, is that there's little or no conviction that this multiplicity is a celebration of the one. Instead, it's just a multiplicity, and so therefore chaotic.
Right.
And of course, we can't live like that, because it's not true to ourselves. So we're in this phase, I think, where that's sort of being shaken out. But maybe like you saying that YouTube is no longer swamped with rants against postmodernism, maybe something different is beginning to emerge, even amidst the chaos.
That would be nice to think. I mean, I think there is a growing feeling of kind of reality and truth being a living thing, and I think if you see the truth and see reality that way, it really takes the teeth out of things like postmodernism, right? Because then you can just sort of, well, if I look at the world this way, and yet I still see that it's alive, what more is there for me, or something like that.
I think it's really helpful to know the past in order to understand the present. I think that is another problem that the postmodern has had, is that it's only postmodern to a degree. It's still modern in the sense that it believes in a kind of progression of knowledge. It's still positivist. It has a residual unprocessed positivism, as Barfield would put it. Whereas if you know about the pre-modern as well, you can spot the similarities with the postmodern, but then realize what's really happening, which is the uncoupling from a divine vision. And that's the real problem, therefore.
Yeah, fair enough. But I mean, we're uncoupled. In the modernist view, we're uncoupled from that divine vision as well in a different way. But and we apply that to our view of history, and so I find that I've had a difficulty getting into history. And I think one of the reasons that I'm recognizing now, because I'm finding these writers fascinating, is that history has been flattened, right, to the point that there's one arc of history, there's one narrative. Again, I'm getting postmodern, but there's really one thing. There's one thing to take from World War II. And I'm not advocating for a revision, a strong revision of our conclusions about World War II or anything like that. But I know that is an energy that's going on right now, and I think it is because we sense this flattening, and we know there's something a little bit unnatural about it when we look at history. Whereas the sort of visionary view of history would be, this this thing you're saying of all these different cosmologies. What do they say about humanity? What do they, how do they reveal different aspects of our humanity and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, this is not to say that there isn't such a thing as good and bad, and there
Right.
isn't such a thing as discernment.
Right.
That
No.
absolutely is. That's what enables you to live
Yeah.
in amidst the chaos. But it's a discernment that's not based on abstract rules that distance you from reality, but
Yeah.
from a participation with reality.
Yeah.
So Dante's Divine Comedy is definitely about good and evil, but it's about a journey through
Yeah.
evil to discover good. It's not Dante and Virgil sitting on a rock somewhere saying, how terrible all those people were and they must be in hell somewhere down there.
Right.
No, they go into hell
Yeah.
to know within themselves what's going on. And I think
Right.
that's another way of saying why the church has gone so horribly wrong.
Right.
Because it's tried to live an uncoupled life. And in a way, therefore, is very modern so often as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I recently watched a video interview with a writer about Lucifer, and he was basically saying that Paradise Lost, or Milton's writing made such a compelling character of Lucifer that it's really kind of the lesser acknowledged beginnings of Luciferianism or something like that, which I think is a really interesting and bold. I mean, it's a sign of good writing more than it is a mistake or something like that, where there was this, you could see the productive energy in that sort of Luciferian character or something like that, which is I don't know, that's what came to mind when you were saying that, and to even think into Lucifer as something where I could find truth for myself. It feels like an anti-Christian thing, but it's that modernist mentality, or that modern mentality again, of good, bad.
Yeah, no, I mean, in Dante, Lucifer perversely echoes Christ, and that was a very medieval understanding. That for example, Lucifer is emptied, but it's not a kenotic emptying. It's a kind of the self-emptying of the pride that says, I can turn my back on the all and know it myself. So hence Milton's better to reign in hell than be ruled in heaven.
Yeah. I may have been mixing Milton and Dante, and forgive me there.
Yeah, no, I think this is right. I mean, people do sometimes say that Milton makes Lucifer an appealing character and heaven an unappealing place.
Right.
Because Paradise Lost, has a kind of vitality that Paradise Regained doesn't.
Right.
Which is why everyone should read the Divine Comedy, because the paradise in the Divine Comedy is the place you want to be.
Right.
But you can only really be in that place when you've been to the other places as well. Right. That's the sort of difference.
Yeah, there's an other sideness to heaven that is dependent on that perspective gained through hell or whatever. Yeah, that does seem very true to me. Yeah, we're at an hour. I've really loved this, and I'll probably draw to a close. I guess my last thought that I guess I found comforting in your book, Awake, was that I guess one of the things that has worried me when I think about people like Blake is the notion of, was their life good? You know what I mean? Like, people, Nietzsche is a classic example of someone who has had a great effect and has these ideas that clearly have this great vitality to them. And he died in such a terrible way that you sort of, it does cast a bit of it, like it's like a Debbie Downer, wah, wah, like on the end of his life. And even it casts a little bit of a pall on his philosophy. But mercifully, it seems as though Blake ended his life in about the best way you could to reinforce the vitality of what he said, or the resonance and the importance of what he said. I'm trying to avoid the word true, because I don't, it's more than that. Because he died, the end of his life, he was in poverty, but felt wealthy. The book describes, and kind of, appreciated the young modern people, and had some dialogue with them, and basically died well, which I guess is infinitely comforting. I actually had a moment that I had forgotten about until I was reading the last chapter of your book, where I had looked up Blake for some reason, and on Wikipedia, and this is a kind of a weird thing to be there. Rather than a million quotes of him, there was his last words to his wife were there. Are you familiar with those?
Yeah. I mean, it was this sort of sit still, Catherine, while I draw you, you've ever been an angel to me.
Yes. Something like that. Yeah, exactly. And I had a moment with that. I mean, I was really just doing the typical looking something up really quick on Wikipedia, as you always do, and just wept. Like I really, that really struck me. And I guess it's not really a question, as usual, but it is kind of like a statement that this book kind of does help situate his thought within his life in such a way that you can be comforted that you can live this way, that it's a livable way to be. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, no, I think that Blake did achieve an enlightenment at the end of his life, in the spiritual sense, not in the Newtonian sense.
Right.
And yeah, that there's plenty of testimony that whilst he had definitely known trouble before, and he writes himself very much about that trouble, both in the sense of the societal trouble around him, but also the personal distress that he faced. But nonetheless, he seems in the last, 8 to 10 years of his life, he dies when he's almost 70, that he did achieve contact with eternity that enabled him to say yes to mortal life as well, with whatever happened. Mm-hmm. So I think that he is one of these figures that is an aspiration in that way as well. His life was writing about something that he did also realize.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's important, of course. If you're stressing that life is found in what's real, not in an ideal, then it's good to know that this realism was known by Blake.
Yeah.
As much as pursued and held as a belief by Blake.
Right. Yeah. I find it, like I say, very comforting or something like that, because we do associate some visionary things with madness and insanity and early death. And there's even a great resonance. I had forgotten the quote and you just said it again. There's even a great resonance, I think, in the fact that at the very end, this person who had seen angels, and I'm so jealous of that. Like my Christian life has been really fraught with just begging God for visions, just to be honest, and not.
Well, just let me leap in there. I was at an event a week or so back with the poet Ben Okri, and he's a Booker-winning novelist and a great poet as well. And at one point, he brought us to a sort of momentary pause before we all exclaimed with delight when he said, well, don't ever forget that seeing is not visual, clearly. And what he meant is that, of course, when you see, it's not what enters your eyes primarily that matters. It's what you know with your mind, with your intuition, your inspiration, imagination. Yeah. And he said that's very much the life of the poet. Now, you might then try and produce something that's visual. And indeed, sometimes you might see something visually as well. But most of the seeing we do is not done through the eyes. Right. This was another really hugely important Blakean point, that empiricism has persuaded you that unless you see it with your eyes, it's not real. And right. Blake's saying, no, you've got to cleanse the doors of perception. The philosophy that is the case. Yeah. So it's, seeing the angels is about the felt awareness. It's about something that comes to you. It's about, the tree that the wise man sees is not the same tree as the fool sees, as Blake puts it. Right. The angels, the living intelligences that are active, they're all around us. And we couldn't have a thought. We couldn't speak in language unless the angels weren't facilitating as it were, the reception of vibrations on
Yeah.
the air as meaningful words.
Yeah.
That's bringing down the divine word into our words.
Yeah.
So this is one of the ways in which, holding out for what Blake meant when he said that he knew the angels, rather than diagnosing it away, opens up a whole new perception of reality that's always here already. In fact, we're always experiencing it already.
Right.
It's just that we've been persuaded that the flatland account is the true account. Back to the Galileo point. When, of course, the flatland account can't really account for what we know every day.
Right.
So it's not about an exceptional experience. It is, and Blake's very clear on this, it's about the everyday experience. As the world is seen in a grain of sand, not in a psychedelic blast.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and thanks to, I guess, yourself and some of the thinkers you've put me onto, and even the frame of mind that has come about through trying to engage, in this deeper way. That's a very slow realization that is coming to me, and a slow sense of comfort is coming along in that, because I felt denied visions and things, and there was a time when I would have read about Blake and I would have been like, oh, fuck off, you know what I mean? Like, geez, like, you just rub it in that I'm not having this experience. But so yeah, through grace, I feel like I'm getting there, and it feels really good. But I thought it was a really cool thing that his last words were of a human being an angel, you know what I mean, to him. Was
that weeping, that weeping is the breaking of eternity into the temporal. I mean, he says that about Catherine, and that drawing, or at least one drawing of Catherine, is actually in Tate Britain here in London, and it's not on permanent display, but you can request to see these things, which I did. And I remember walking into the room where that drawing of Catherine was, which is just in this beautiful kind of pen and ink line drawing, very simple. And it brought me to tears as well, because you could see the affection, the soul of their love was in the eyelashes, particularly. That's the bit I remember, the way that he drew her eyelashes. It was so vivid that you felt their love, in the paper and pen before you. And again, that is the living vitality. That's the spiritual being of all things, including the material, of course.
Beautiful.
But, that's the important thing.
Yeah. Well, there's a new jealousy for me. I hope to see some of those things in person one day. I mean, it's a good jealousy. I'm glad that you were able to do that. If anybody should see those things in real life, it would be you. So
well, look, I mean, it's the east coast of the US, but nonetheless, the US has wonderful collections of Blake. The Library of Congress, the Yale Center for British Art. One of the good things about Blake not being super famous when he died is that his work was distributed. So now there's work in all sorts of places, in fact.
Well, I think I'll end there. It's such a positive, beautiful note to end on. And thank you so much for speaking to me again. And thanks for writing Awake. And I look forward to the audiobook, and I hope that that you'll keep writing books.
Yeah, well, look, similarly, Aaron, I hope, keep having these conversations, because the hope is not just that we get to talk more and share these things more, which is good for us, but also that people listening in are having the conversation as well. And the doors of perception are being cleansed.
That's
even
my
in the
prayer.
process.
Yeah. Thank you.